All right, now we're going to spend several slides on the same sentence because this one says countries will not place in orbit around the Earth any objects carrying nuclear weapons or any other kinds of weapons of mass destruction. I'm going to say WMD as my acronym for this session. Install such weapons on celestial bodies or station such weapons in outer space in any other manner. Here we have some pretty clear language. Hooray. Prohibition of nuclear weapons or other WMD in full orbit is clear. The definition of the weapon of mass destruction is not as clear, and the Senate did quiz Ambassador Goldberg about it quite a bit. And it would be the starting point for a legal analysis. And one thing that he and other members of the executive branch said was that whether a weapons capacity for annihilation is on par with a nuclear weapons capacity determines whether it's a weapon of mass destruction. So even though, when I was at the FAA working on space issues, the engineers always told me, a paint chip can take out things, and a paint chip is a weapon of mass destruction. No, it's not. Not under this kind of thinking. And it is something we'd have to pay attention to because although we have plain language, it's not totally clear. So we should be guided by what the folks said in the Senate testimony. Next slide, please. Now, still on that same sentence. So we know that nuclear weapons and WMD are prohibited in orbit. How about other weapons? Well, for a long time in the last century, and I think to this present day, the Russians would take pistols, and NASA once told me rifles, into orbit because when they came back to Siberia, this is not to repel borders. This was because when they got back to Siberia and it was really cold and scary, there were bears and wolves. So they needed to have some means of protecting themselves. On a more less charming note, there are ASAT weapons used. There is jamming. There are cyber attacks. And so we do know that persistent general state practice, we are seeing that the understanding is that you can have other weapons in orbit as long as they are not nuclear or WMD. Military reconnaissance, navigation, and communication satellites are not forbidden. But one thing that people need to keep in mind is that there's another provision of the treaty which calls on countries to conduct their activities in the exploration and use of outer space with due regard to the corresponding interests of all other states parties to the treaty. This is a very long provision, and it goes on to require consultations before you interfere with someone else. So I would assume that, if one country was going to start jamming another country's satellites, first they would call up and chat about it. That was sarcasm.